This is Jed Distler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. A few days ago, the news came through that pianist Alfred Brendel had passed away at the age of 94. And with so many of my musician colleagues and fellow music writers weighing in on social media, several colleagues called me and texted me wanting my thoughts about this performance or that recording. My friend Tim Page wrote a very perceptive and informative obituary for the Washington Post, and he generously included a quotation from a booklet note that I had written about Alfred Brendel's early recordings. I attended some of Alfred Brendel's recitals and concerto performances in the 1980s and early 1990s in New York, always at Carnegie Hall. Actually, once at Lincoln Center at Avery Fisher Hall. I'm still not used to having to call it Geffen Hall. It's the same way that I refuse to call Carnegie Hall Isaac Stern Hall. And I think it was at Geffen Hall, Avery Fisher Hall, where I heard Alfred Brendel play a wonderful performance of the Schernburgg Piano Concerto with Zubin Mehta conducting the New York Philharmonic. I've reviewed many of Alfred Brendel's recordings over the years, most comprehensively in the reviews that I did of those two big box sets. One is from Brilliant Classics, which contains Brendel's complete solo and concerto recordings for the Vox and Vanguard labels. And for Gramophone, I reviewed Decca's big box containing Brendel's complete Philips recordings, and it also contained his commercial recordings for Deutsche Grammophon, Decca, and EMI, missing just a couple of items, however. If you read my Brendel reviews, you will find out that I've always harbored a kind of ambivalence about certain aspects of Brendel's pianism and his interpretations. And rather than go into great detail about that here, I'm posting links to these reviews in our episode description, and these are reviews that I wrote for ClassicsToday.com. And they're pretty detailed, so you can really see chapter and verse about what I like or don't like about certain recordings. But for this episode, I decided to list 10 recordings that I think represent Alfred Brendel's fusion of pianism and artistry in the most convincing and rewarding ways. So let's start. My first recording, number 1 on this list, is the Schubert Sonata in C minor, Deutsch number 958, the first of the 3 so-called posthumous sonatas. And this is the first recording that he made of this work. It's on the Vanguard label, and I think it's just fantastic, because in this recording, Brendel fuses headlong intensity with lyrical repose in a way that's more organic and natural to my ears than in his relatively fussier Philips remakes. And my goodness, what power he unleashes in the finale. Those galloping triplets are like a bucking bronco, but they don't spin out of control or lose focus. It is true in this recording that Brendel does not take the first movement exposition repeat, but look, it doesn't really matter. Okay, recording number 2. This is the coupling of Mozart's concertos in D minor, Kochel 466, and C minor, Kochel 491, with Charles Mackerras conducting the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. And as much as I enjoy Brendel's earlier recordings on Philips of these 2 minor key concertos with Neville Marriner conducting, these digital remakes with Mackerras, I think, are far more detailed and imaginatively inflected and full of inner drama. They just come alive in every moment, and they are gorgeously engineered as well. Number 3, the Schernburgg Concerto. This was a specialty of Alfred Brendel's. He championed this pretty much throughout his career. The recording that I like the best of his 3 commercial versions is the one that he did for Deutsche Grammophon with Raphael Kubelik conducting the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra. Here, I think that Brendel invests Schernburg's piano writing with character and inflection that somehow communicates an affinity with Brahms' piano music and a kind of continuation of that lineage. And while the orchestral image is not so lean and transparent as you hear in the Mitsuko Ushida Pierre Boulez recording, or even the Emanuel Ax Esa-Pekka Salonen recording, I love the heft and resonance and color that Kubelik elicits from the Bavarian Radio Winds and Brass. And this is a wonderful collaboration, and it's beautifully recorded, too. So the Schernburgg Concerto with Brendel and Kubelik. Number 4, the Liszt Toten Tons with Bernard Haitink conducting the London Philharmonic. You would never associate Alfred Brendel's scholarly demeanor with the elemental, hard-hitting, and positively demonic playing that he displays in this recording of Toten Tons. And there's more sting and bite, I think, to Bernard Haitink's London Philharmonic than you hear with the same conductor and orchestra in their cycle of Liszt tone poems. I mean, this is kind of an atypical Brendel recording, but this is really edge-of-seat Liszt playing, and how. Number 5, Beethoven's Diabelli Variations, and the one I want to recommend is the 1988 studio recording for Philips. Earlier this year, I did an extended episode about the Diabelli Variations, comparing different pianists, and I talked about the 4 commercially issued recordings with Alfred Brendel playing this work. Brendel himself favored his live performance from Royal Festival Hall that took place on May 30th, 2001, which was released on Decca. And certainly it's the most spontaneous and unified of the 4 recordings, even though here and there are some telltale signs that he's not quite mustering up the energy he had when he was younger, certainly in that earlier 1976 live recording, which was also made in London. But I think that Brendel's 1988 studio recording seems to split the difference between the 2 live versions' strong points, and the sound quality is even warmer. And also, Brendel has the advantage of studio editing, although those 2 live recordings are impressively accurate in and of themselves. So while I definitely would seek out those 2 live Philips Diabellis with Alfred Brendel, I would start with his 1988 studio version. Number 6 on my list. This may surprise you. Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, and this is his Vox recording from the 1950s. He re-recorded this for Philips in the 80s, I think, but I prefer this Vox version in every way. You have to remember that Alfred Brendel played next to no Russian music, except maybe for the Vox recordings of the Prokofiev Fifth Concerto. And there's a really impressive account of Balakirev's Islame, and also the 3 movements from Petrushka of Stravinsky. That is a fabulous recording, too. But I think the Pictures at an Exhibition is technically strong and musically sound, and I think it's always held its own alongside versions that you would more readily cite, like those of Sviatoslav Richter, Byron Janis, Gary Grafman, or Vladimir Ashkenazy. Number 7 on my list, we have music of Mozart again, and this is the Sonata in F major, Koschel 533 and 494. This is a recording released in 2003 that I just adore. And he recorded the sonata in 1992, but I much prefer this version because I think he reaches levels of nuance and timing and harmonic shading only hinted at in the 1992 recording. And listen to the way he organizes the first movement's canonic motion so that the entrances sound almost as if they're coming from different instruments. And the slow movement has a newfound serenity and a lyric quality that's completely natural and unforced. And also, Brendel fuses delicacy and strength to marvelous effect in the rondo, although the movement's music box-like textures don't quite shimmer in this recording as they did when I heard Brendel play the piece live at Carnegie Hall back in April of 2002. And while Brendel observed all the repeats in 1992, in this recording he wisely omits the second repeats in the first two movements, which I think makes a lot more sense. I should mention, though, that there is a live recording of this sonata from 2008, taken from Alfred Brendel's series of farewell concerts. And in this live performance, he takes the first movement a shade faster, and it's a little bit lighter. And in the finale, you do get that music box quality that does not quite manifest in the 2003 release. So I'm kind of cheating here. I'm giving you a choice between Brendel's 2003 release and the 2008 farewell concert in the Mozart K533 494 Sonata. Number 8 on my list is the Sonata Number 2, Opus 39 in A-flat major by Carl Maria von Weber. I heard Brendel play this in concert, and it was just a marvelous performance. You know, this work has been actually quite lucky on disc. You have that fantastic pioneering recording, I think, from 1939 with Alfred Cortot. And then there are, I think, several live Emil Gilels performances. The one that I know best was the 1969 Carnegie Hall recording. And there also was a wonderful studio recording by Dino Ciani. And to this list, I also would add Alfred Brendel. He plays the Andante as if it was an orchestral transcription with a lot of variety in his sound and lots of dynamic contrast. And although he takes the Minuetto Capriccioso at quite a clip here, the melodic rise and fall unfolds with no effort at all, and Brendel's fingers are really at their most supple. This is a terrific recording. Number 9, the Schumann Concerto with Kurt Sunderling conducting the Philharmonia Orchestra. Brendel recorded the Schumann Concerto twice in the studio. There was his 1984 version with Claudio Abbado and the London Symphony Orchestra, which was coupled with Weber's Concertstück for piano and orchestra. Then Brendel re-recorded the Schumann for a 1998 release with Kurt Sunderling conducting the Philharmonia Orchestra, and it was coupled with Schumann's C major Fantasy. And for all the Abbado versions' surface elegance and mobility, I tend to gravitate toward the heft and the mass and the strong bass lines that characterize Sunderling's orchestral framework, while Brendel's dynamic surges and his forceful accents in the first movement really keep things moving. Some people will think that Brendel underplays the finale's cross rhythms and that his rather relaxed and lyrical approach doesn't communicate the music's exuberance the way, let's say, that the Rudolf Serkin version does. But this is an intelligent and very shapely interpretation, and I think quite special in its own way. And last on my list, number 10, is the Theme with Variations by Brahms, arranged by the composer from the second movement of his string sextet, Opus 18. My gramophone colleague, David Fanning, really did not like this recording, and I want to quote from his review. He said that it is a moot point where legitimate coarseness ends and ugliness begins. That's kind of harsh. I can understand why he wrote that, and, one can argue that there's sometimes a kind of effortfulness to the spread chords, and that Brendel does use a lot of pedal, maybe too much. But Brendel conveys an intense kind of gothic grandeur and fullness of body that almost makes this music sound like not so much a Brahms transcription, but more like a Busoni transcription. And I really like it. And the transitions between variations are totally insidious, and the impassioned intensity and cumulative force of this performance has always held my attention. And I re-listened to it very recently, and it still held up very well. I still really love this. Also, this recording showcases Brendel's ability to project his sonority at full force out in any venue so that whatever he plays at any dynamic level, loud or soft, always had body and definition. And I get a real sense of that in this recording. And if I can sneak in something extra, also on this 1989 release that contained Mozart's Duport Variations and Mendelssohn's Variations Sérieuses, was the second of the two recordings that Brendel made of Franz Liszt's Variations on Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Sagen. He recorded this first in 1975 for Philips, and then he remade it on this 1989 disc. But for some reason, this 1989 version was omitted from that complete Brendel Philips recordings box set that I mentioned earlier. So I've held on to this original single release. It was called Theme and Variations Volume 1, I think. If you want the Philips catalog number, it's 426272. And this is the only way that you can get that later Weinenklangen Variations. And by the way, I heard Brendel play this Liszt piece in concert. And when I was talking about Brendel's projection, my goodness, I will never forget how his sound just carried up to the balcony. And it was like Clark Kent changing into Superman. This was one of the most memorable concert experiences of a pianist in my life, and I'll never forget it. So I think that if you check out these 10 Alfred Brendel recordings, you will get more than a good idea of the unassailable integrity and the commitment that this pianist conveyed in his best recorded performances. Now, I know that you'll have favorite Alfred Brendel recordings that are not on this list, of course, but I wanted to at least try and cover as broad a range of his recorded repertoire as I could within reason. This is Jed Distler, and you just heard a lot of sirens in the background, but that's the way it is, recording in my New York studio. You've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings, and I look forward to being with you for the next episode. Take good care and stay well.